Do you think Miyamoto ever got so frustrated he considered moving to America?
Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the video game, not the movie. The second main release in the series, the second bestseller in this series, the second playable character introduced with about half of his signature features. Sonic 2 is arguably even more defining for the series moving forward than Sonic 1 was, though considering I still hold up Link's Awakening as the game that solidified the Zelda formula, maybe take my gaming history takes with a grain of salt. Still, we get the 2-act format, a robotic Sonic boss, Sonic's first friend, and of course, the franchise's first instance of terrible development conditions. Seriously, they had 9 months to make this game, and that's one of the better parts of the dev cycle. Sonic 2 is iconic, in 100 different ways. Hell, it's one of the most re-released games in the series, and it's beloved. It's also the first game for one of these projects, and hopefully the last, where I did not beat the final boss.
Look, I've beaten the Death Egg robot on Switch Online and in Sonic Origins. I'm not suffering through the Death Egg Zone 3 times in one lifetime. Trust me, I have enough experience with endings ruining a game. I'm not letting that happen this time. Not for Sonic 2. I have weird standards.
Like I mentioned, this game had a less than ideal development cycle. The lead programmer for Sonic 1, Yuji Naka, fully quit Sega shortly after its release because of payment disputes. Meanwhile, the designer, Hirokazu Yasuhara, moved to America and transferred to Sega Technical Institute. Eventually, SDI's founder, Mark Cerny, convinced Naka to move to America as well and join them, leading to key Sonic team developers now living and working in California.
I wonder if that's ever going to come up again.
After Cerny pitched Sonic 2, had it rejected, and then Sega said have it ready by next November, development began in 1992 with a mix of American and Japanese talent. As if that wasn't enough of a headache, Yasuhara ended up making an outline for the game that assumed they'd have 2 years of development. To be fair, it was only off by about 150%. They cut so much content from the game by the end, it's honestly difficult to believe. Hidden Palace is probably the most famous removed level, but also left on the cutting room floor are a forest level, a desert level, Genocide City, a winter level.
I think that was a translation issue. I think they just meant a snowy level.
The game was released on November 21st in Japan and November 24th worldwide, also known as Sonic Tuesday. It was yet another smash success, with over 1 million copies sold within a week of release. It wasn't just a commercial success either, the game was a critical darling as well, getting 90% and over from almost every publication at the time. Except the UK magazine Games Master, which gave it a 65% and said it didn't justify itself as a sequel mostly because it was too easy.
I can't help but notice they never mentioned the Death Egg robot. Maybe this is why they went out of business, like 26 years later.
Our story is entirely in the manual again, although we have slightly more clues since, we have a stalker. According to the Japanese manual, Sonic is visiting West Side Island thanks to his plane that he has, I guess. There he meets a fox named Miles Prower, aka Tails, because he has 2 tails.
Sort of like my brother's old nickname in middle school, Ulcers.
Tails is seemingly a big fan of Sonic, and thanks to his mutation, he can even catch up to his idol by helicoptering, I guess. However, it turns out that Eggbot Mimic is at the island too. He's once again looking for the Chaos Emeralds, only this time he's using them alongside his new ultimate weapon, the Death Egg.
Yep, the Death Egg. Even in the English localizations, it's always called the Death Egg, because again, his name was always Dr. Eggman. Shut up, you're wrong.
Well, this game looks great. Obviously, Sonic 1 looked good by itself, but outside of Green Hill, it could be a little uninteresting to see at times. The backgrounds in particular could be bland, especially later in the game. Here though, not only is the environment much smoother and more varied, but the backgrounds are more detailed, full of personality, and just all around a joy to look at. There are also a ton of little animations for Sonic throughout, a lot more than in Sonic 1, which I can definitely appreciate, even if his sprite looks about the exact same. The music is a lot better too. Obviously for the classic games, most people point to CDs and 3's OSTs as the standouts, but I think Sonic 2 has a more than solid collection of tracks. Special mention has to go to Aquatic Ruins theme, which to me is the sound of classic Sonic. The sound effects are mostly the same from Sonic 1, interestingly, but I guess some things had to be reused. They did only have 9 months to make this whole game.
Seriously, I know I keep repeating that over and over, but I just can't get over it. They made this game in 9 damn months. This was basically a rush job, and yet it's this much better than the original. That's really impressive to me.
Sonic 2 plays really well. The physics are slightly tweaked from the first game in a way I really couldn't quantify if you asked me to. It feels a lot more responsive, less floaty. You have much better control over where Sonic is at any one time, which makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun. They've also removed the speed cap from Sonic 1, meaning you can reach significantly higher speeds than before. This might sound like it would make it even more difficult to manage, but for the most part, the levels are designed to allow for this max velocity. Plus, building up momentum can still be a bit of an issue, though less so now with the addition of the spin dash. Yeah, this move is absolutely invaluable. The spin dash makes quickly gaining speed for ramps and other sections so much easier. It honestly seems like a no-brainer. It all combines to give you a lot more agency while playing the game and pulls the focus away from precision platforming like Sonic 1 tried. We also have Tails joining us on this adventure. And he's sure here. Yeah, Tails isn't at his most useful in this game. He wouldn't really reach his full potential until Sonic 3. Still, he can occasionally be helpful. He can collect rings and attack enemies, which makes things easier. Still, it's not the most crucial part of the gameplay.
Ultimately, though, we have to look at the level design before we can say how good this game is. Like you don't already know it is.
First off, we have Emerald Hill Zone. They weren't even trying there. Look, I know emeralds are important to this series, but they could have made the name not sound like a direct ripoff of Green Hill. Anyways, this level is very similar to that one, but it's still a ton of fun. It's simpler than Green Hill, only 2 routes through both acts, instead of Green Hill's 3. Speaking of, there are only 2 acts for most of the zones in this game, unlike the 3 for each in Sonic 1. I appreciate that. It's shorter overall, but the balance is a lot better. It keeps the pacing tight, and it means the designers don't run out of ideas for the level before you hit the end. I also like the boss fight here. It's one of the easiest in the series, of course, but I think it can be fun to bounce around on anything's head, and I like the design. I honestly think it's more fun than the Wrecking Ball boss from Sonic 1, though that's a hot take I can in no way defend, and it's definitely less iconic. Overall, I think this is one of my favorite Sonic levels ever, and definitely my favorite in this game. Also, I joked about the name, but apparently it's named after a real place in California, Emerald Lake Hills.
Okay, this is officially becoming a pattern.
Thankfully, while Emerald Hill is my favorite level, it isn't a huge drop-off in quality like we got with Sonic 1. Next up is Chemical Plant Zone, arguably the most iconic level in the game. Chemical Plant keeps up the high-speed action, arguably even more than the first zone, with tons of loops, slopes, a switchback dash, and tons of zippers and springs pushing into max velocity. There are a few parts I'm not fond of, unfortunately, like a few nasty beginner's traps, especially near the end. There are also some underwater sections in Act 2, and the moving blocks here are at risk of a lot of unfair crushing, but all said, I had a ton of fun with this level. The boss fight is an interesting duel, since most of the ground is rotating, but he's always vulnerable to attack, and the dead center of the arena is always safe. Also, easier to get the special stages here than ever in Marble Zone. Oh yeah, the half-pipe special stages. They suck. Again, didn't get all the Chaos Emeralds in this playthrough, though this time instead of it being the difficulty of getting to the special stages, it's because the special stages themselves are obnoxious to try and conquer.
I feel I should take a moment to talk about the difficulty thing because I feel like it could be a recurring theme for this project. I don't inherently dislike difficulty in video games. I can definitely understand the appeal of brutally hard games or even rage games. My tastes do admittedly skew more towards easier games, which shouldn't be all that shocking if you saw my review of the Lost levels. But my main issue isn't so much with difficulty as it is with annoyance. Obnoxious, unfair difficulty, more so than just a game that requires practice or patience. Which, you could argue this game still does.
Our third level is Aquatic Ruin Zone, our water level of choice for this game, and it's only really half a water level. This is so much better than Lava Zone ever was, and as I already mentioned, this music is instantly iconic. I love it so much. The only real complaint I have is that the plants in the foreground kind of scroll weirdly, and some of the enemies have odd hitboxes. Also, this is where Grounder from the Sonic cartoon originally came from, except he apparently received a paint job for the show. Also, can we talk about the graphics again? The foreground plants aside, this level looks truly beautiful. Maybe I'm just a sucker for 16-bit ancient ruins, but the mountains in the background, the jungle stretching over the horizon, and the brickwork underfoot, I love it. In any case, the level design is incredibly well built. I prefer the top route above the water, but I don't actually hate the underwater sections all that much either. I've still never drowned in these classic Sonic games. The boss is also interesting. Robo-Man hits these pillars that shoot arrows and you have to jump off them to hit him. It's one of those classics, if the boss stopped attacking, they wouldn't get hurt as much fights, which is just a classic of the series.
And just video games in general, honestly.
Finally, we've reached Casino Night Zone, the other most iconic level in the game. Casino Night does right what Spring Yard failed at, bouncing around on bumpers and springs, pinball flippers that turn the game into an early taste of Sonic's pinball, and even slot machines that I swear to God I didn't manage to activate even once. Even the enemies help bounce you around. All of it may make things a nightmare for horizontalist challenge runs, but in general, this is a fun time. There are also pinball plungers, elevators, conveyor belts, fake moving blocks, rectangular targets that fade in a few bounces. It's all so damn much. The boss fight is obnoxious, unfortunately. I think I sort of figured out how I'm supposed to hit him, but the spike bombs and electricity on the bottom are annoying to deal with. Still, it sticks with the pinball table theme, I suppose. God, the theming here is so good. I can absolutely see why this became such a staple of the franchise.
Are we seriously giving each zone its own section? I don't always have a witty zinger for in between them. Also, we're definitely not doing this for the games with over a dozen levels.
Hilltop Zone, just about the halfway point for the game. While Casino Night stuck to one theme and pulled it off with gusto, Hilltop feels more like a grab bag. We got caves, mountain peaks, lava pits, the seesaws from Starlight Zone. There are even dinosaur-themed badniks left over from earlier in development when this level was a past version of Green Hill Zone, and viney gondolas to ride down past pits like Sonic is equipped with the snowboard. We also have rising lava sections to deal with that are frankly kind of obnoxious to handle, but otherwise, yeah, a pretty fun level. The boss is against a flame-throwing lava submarine, which is interesting to fight at least. After that, we have Mystic Cave Zone, the first zone in the game I wasn't really fond of while playing. I don't think it's terrible, I like the colors, and it's a level where I was conclusively convinced how much better the controls are compared to Sonic 1. However, the hanging switch and vine gimmick didn't really do it for me, and I just think the level design in general here is meh at best. Also, the boss fight isn't terribly memorable, honestly, just a drilling machine that goes down in a few hits.
I mean, we didn't give all the levels in the 2D Mario games their own individual reviews. Yeah, I know most of them were shorter, but we could still have reviewed the worlds of Mario 3. Oh, you meant the reviews?
Oil Ocean Zone. This world probably doesn't have worries about running out of fossil fuels, but global warming must be even more of a bitch. Again, it's not terrible, but I'm not a big fan of the oil slicks or the quicksand-like oil at the bottom of this stage. The launchers are an interesting touch, though at least one green furnace into launcher is a little glitchy, with some spikes nearby also launching you into the air. The boss is an interesting level device with a few odd tentacles. If you played the Sonic Mania version of this level, it's very similar to that one's Act 2 boss, but the vulnerable part moves slower in this version. It's not a bad level really, just not my own personal taste.
So of course it's one of the 2 levels that I'm going to be playing again in Mania. Oh well, at least the arson should be cathartic.
Next, the single longest zone in this game, Metropolis Zone. Seriously, for some reason I will never understand. Exactly one zone in the entire game has 3 acts like Sonic 1, while every other zone has either 2 or just 1. Metropolis sucks, I'm gonna be honest. The starfish are just completely bullshit in every way. The screwboat obstacles are an interesting idea, going up or down depending on what direction you're running. Unfortunately, between the starfish generally being embedded near them, getting stuck in the middle until jumping or hitting the bottom, and the risks of going all the way up, they can just as often end up being annoying as fun. The round spike blocks are obnoxious to work with the rhythm of, the giant cogs work in ways that don't feel right, and I swear the crushers were sent directly from hell. Oh, and let's not forget about the praying mantis enemies who shoot out homing slicers. Yes, it took until near the very end of the game, but we've reached a level just as obnoxious as those from Sonic 1. The boss fight at least is charming, with you knocking a ton of mini eggmobiles out of orbit of the real deal, taking them out and then landing the final hit on Embryo Check Slave.
Look, sometimes I write in jokes just because I think they're funny. You don't have to agree with that any more than you do with my rankings.
After that comes the glorified minigame of Sky Chase Zone. It's fine as minigames go, but it's basically just a short distraction from the main action. It's more or less a transition into the penultimate level, Wing Fortress Zone, another one-act deal, and it's not a particularly pleasant act. I don't like the entire bottom of the level is one big bottomless pit, and the easiest top-of-the-level route requires making an absurdly precise jump, getting pulled up through a fan that you'd think would hurt Sonic more than anything else, and then going to the left despite a path to the right technically existing. The boss fight is also less than interesting. I'm glad that we get actual rings after the checkpoint, but bouncing around on small spiked platforms to hit a small weak point that shoots lasers is just a little bit too annoyingly precise for my liking. After that, we head up to our final challenge, the Death Egg Zone. Like Final Zone before it, this is basically just a final boss level. Though this time we have 2 bosses to fight, with no checkpoint in between. No rings, no items, not even the chance to use the newly introduced supersonic form. Like mentioned earlier, I didn't bother trying to beat the whole thing, but I did at least figure out how to defeat Mecha/Silver/ kinda unnamed but still infamous Robot Sonic. But the Death Egg Robot, no, not this year. I'm practicing self-care.
I completely forgot to even talk about Supersonic, didn't I? Biggest new addition short of the spin dash, and I completely neglected it just because of the damn half pipe. Supersonic is a cool little power-up, though I'll probably have more to say about it when I actually use it in Sonic 3 and beyond. I have used it in this game with the same versions where I beat the Death Egg Robot, but those either had retries to the special stages or a rewind function, so not exactly easy to replicate on Mega Collection. And I think that's about everything about this game worth talking about, and I'm disappointed that we hit the good game, terrible ending bingo square this early, but let's go broader scope here.
I cannot properly express how thankful I am for this game's improvements over its predecessor. Like I mentioned in my last review, I was genuinely considering scrapping the whole project because of how absolutely infuriating that game became in its later stages. Thankfully, while there was a noticeable dip in quality near the end, Sonic 2 overall managed to outshine the original in just about every single way. Better level design, better gimmicks, more fun bosses, less obnoxious enemies, and gameplay that actually feels good to engage with. It's not without its problems, of course. I think the special stages are way more obnoxious to beat compared to the rotating labyrinth, and there are a few beginner's traps that I could do without. And like I've made clear by now, the latter half of the game ranges from not my personal taste to generally what were they thinking marketing this to children, but to be fair, there are still some shining moments.
So, yeah, all around, I had a great time with this game. I see why it's such a staple of the Sega back catalog. I do think there are elements that could be, and from my memory, were improved on in later entries, so we'll have that to look forward to at least. Unfortunately, the next entry isn't one of the improvements. It's a storage medium.